here. And we have more, so that's good. Right, well, we have a line-up at the moment with Councillor Lee, Mike Lee, and then Councillor Newman, and then Councillor Simpson,
Point of order,
Councillor Denise Lee, and then and maybe Mayor Gold. Yes, point of order is?
Mr. Chair, can I get your ruling on a couple of points that I saw prior to lunch? And it's about your approach to the debate as chair. Standing Order 1.4.2 is about, people only speaking once, and I accept that. But, Mr. Chair, and I do want to support you, and I'm not trying to bring you into the debate unnecessarily, but on 3 occasions, Mr. Chair, once when Member Tauhanare was speaking, once following Greg Sayer's contribution, and once in the middle of Councillor Fletcher's contribution, I felt that your interventions actually brought you into the debate, and I don't think that was particularly helpful. Now, with respect to Councillor Fletcher, you could say that you were calling her up because it was your interpretation that she was disrespecting the staff, and Councillor Fletcher took a view on that. I don't know what the purpose of the intervention when the Honourable Tauhanare was speaking, but when Councillor Sayers concluded his speech, I didn't think that that was a clarifying question. I thought that that was a matter of debate. Now, if you want to take a call, Mr. Chair, you can. But I mean, as a member of the governing body, as a committee of the whole, you should speak once. But to use the position of chair to continue to interject to introduce matters of debate, I think creates a situation whereby this meeting becomes a less structured than it should. And I don't need a response now, but if you could ponder that, because I want to support an orderly process, but I found the interventions during the debate prior to lunch unhelpful.
Right, so what we're going to do then, Councillor, is I'm going to use the bell. So, at 4 minutes 30 seconds, I'm going to hit the bell, which I don't want to do, but you're asking me to do. So that gives, when the bell goes, which is a bit like at school, you're going to know it's 30 seconds to go, children. Okay, so what we're going to do, but I thought I was quite clear that there are questions, and then there is debates. So there's no one else at the moment who has a question. Of course, you can ask a question during the debate if you want to, but we're on debate now, and we have Councillor Mike Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Can I at the outset record my objection to the removal of our right to discuss this before we voted on the rates increase? To go back to the source of this targeted rate, it came from the Mayor, of course, and it seems to relate to the Mayor's pledge to reduce the pledge 3.5% in the long-term plan down to 2.5% during his election campaign. The questions we have to ask ourselves is this targeted rate fair and reasonable? Is it legal? And the other question I would like for us to think about is it really a targeted rate as normally understood? The Mayor has referred to the ratepayers and the accommodation providers as if they were two different sorts of people. The accommodation providers on Waiheke Island, as an example, are certainly ratepayers. And they don't believe that this targeted rate is fair and reasonable for them. They don't believe they get value from ATEED. They don't even have an eyesight on Waiheke Island. Yes, tourist visitation to Waiheke Island has significantly increased. But they maintain that happened after the very positive publicity in the Lonely Planet Guide, nothing to do with ATEED. 88% of visitors to Waiheke are day trippers and 60% of people who use accommodation are from the Auckland region. Tourists, visitors, everyone who goes to Waiheke pays a ferry levy twice when they cross the wharf at Auckland and when they cross it at Waiheke, and that goes into the council family, and that levy, despite the increase in patronage and usage, is totally non-transparent to them and just about everyone else outside the AT bureaucracy. In terms of the legality of this targeted rate, I want to relate again section 23. A local authority may set of the Local Government Ratings Act 2002. A local authority may set a rate that is not provided for in its long-term plan and funding impact statement only if the local authority is satisfied that the rate is required to meet an unforeseen and urgent need for revenue that cannot be reasonably met by any other means, etc., etc., etc. I think that is a point of real concern regarding the legal safety of this particular measure. In regard to my question about whether this is actually a targeted rate as normally understood, every time the Mayor discusses this targeted rate, which the first level, on the first level is meant to be about accommodation owners paying AT for the advertising and tourist promotion that it does, but almost immediately leads into a claim that this money is actually going for infrastructure. Going for infrastructure. Mass transit infrastructure to the airport, I've heard the Mayor say a few times. The fact that we're going to raise $13.5 million, if this goes through, from accommodation providers to help fund mass transit to the airport is risible, is absolutely risible. If we are going to fund, and mass transit is I'm not sure what he means by that. Does he mean light rail, which is a dubious form of mass transit to the airport? Or does he mean what Auckland Transport means, which is buses to the airport, advanced buses starting in 2024. So I think the more the Mayor talks about infrastructure, the more he undermines the case that this is a genuine targeted rate, an open and shut form of rating.
I'll move an extension.
I'll second.
I'll be brief. Mr. Chairman, I'll be brief because the Mayor raises an important point. I don't think somebody should come into local government with no experience in local government and start advocating and driving through a targeted rate which is so clumsy and so problematic. But he's right. He's absolutely right to raise concerns about infrastructure and the need for funding infrastructure. And if he thought about it, we have the means already to start or restart or reboot a regional infrastructure fund, and that is the money that comes from the diversified asset funds. That is the money that comes from Auckland International Airport, and that is the money that comes from Ports of Auckland. All non-ratepayer alternative funding sources that could go into, with the diversified funds, into a targeted infrastructure fund that could that would be essential to build the infrastructure we need. But to ask motel owners and hotel owners to pay for this is unfair, probably illegal, and I think will be challenged. The other point, I've talked about the Waiheke accommodation providers, how unfair an imposition they feel that is for them. And I don't normally go into bat for the big city hotel people, but to be fair to them, they're already paying a targeted rate, a conventional targeted rate, as accepted and understood. They pay for an extra rate to pay for, and they get amenities in the city, a proper targeted rate. This is not really a targeted rate as understood, and I think pushing this forward right now is going to be very problematic for the council. But I wish we could have discussed it before we decided on the rating level. Thank you.
Councillor Newman.
Mr Chair, rates aren't going up by 2.5%. When you start to factor in the targeted rates from today, the rate increase will be higher than that. The accommodation provider targeted rate, that is not a levy on visitors to this city. The accommodation provider targeted rate, that is a rate on the capital value of a tiny cohort of properties, around 300 properties give or take. And if you take this report at face value, and I do, even under a revised scheme, the amount of the targeted rate set at 50% of a TEED's budget for expenditure on visitor attraction and major events is $13.45 million. Now, the Mayor's logic, and the logic I think has been expressed by Councillor Cashmore, and I suspect others will too, is that tourists who get off the plane from Singapore and other places internationally and who stay at commercial accommodation, they make the targeted rate viable. Well, under this proposal, Mr Chair, at the Maniarewa Village establishment at 127 Great South Road in my ward will pay a total rate next year of around about $8,500 plus an estimated targeted rate in addition to that of around $2,780. Mr Chair, no one gets off the plane from Singapore to check into the Maniarewa Village. If you go to the Maniarewa Village, it's because you require emergency accommodation. Former commercial motels in my ward go from owner-operator through to lease, through to the accommodation premises of last resort by the local Winds office. I mean, the idea that we have this policy that could be based on the presumption that those people who require emergency accommodation in South Auckland are somehow the targeted cohort to fund visitor attraction for a TEED, to fund Adele concerts, Justin Bieber, that is a nonsense. What drives demand for a commercial accommodation in my ward, Mr Chair, is poverty and homelessness and an inadequate supply of social housing. I got an email yesterday from a TEED. It's a very good email, and it was referred to by Councillor Cashmore, talking about the 36th World Veterinarian Association Congress, where 3,000 veterinarians are coming to Auckland. I think that's excellent. Mr Chair, I ask you this question. How many of those veterinarians are going to be staying at the Cedar Park Motor Lodge next to the homeless whānau of Maniarewa? The answer is none. Mr Chair, I have had a lot of correspondence on this. I got correspondence, for example, from Russell Bartlett QC, and he wanted to lecture me about the test set out under Section 101 of the Local Government Act. I didn't need his lecture on that because I know it myself. And the test provides a series of gateway criteria, community outcomes to which a TEED primarily contributes, the distribution of benefits, timing, causation, costs and benefits, including the consequences for transparency and accountability. Now, he's entitled to be free and frank with his advice. I didn't need it, but I suspect some people around this place do. Mr Chair, what I needed to do and what other people needed to do was go to the hotels and the motels, and I did that, and I visited the laundries and kitchens and the reception desks all over Auckland. And what that said to me is that you simply cannot apportion 100% of a targeted rate, whether at 27.8 or at $13.45 million, to be paid for by either 10% of the tourist industry, if you believe the MB figures set out on para 78 in attachment A, or 22% of the tourist industry, if you prefer the Statistics New Zealand figures set out at paragraph 79 in the same document. Either way, we're not even close. We're not even close. And that, colleagues, provides the basis for risk that, in my view, the gateway criteria having not been met creates a risk of error of law. Now, there has been some case law cited in earlier discussions. In Woolworths versus Wellington City Council, The court found that a business rate differential on the grounds of benefits received could not be sustained on a reasonable basis because of the quantum of differential. Now, actually, that was overturned at the Court of Appeal, but I just wanted to read into the debate today what the Court of Appeal said, because I think it is relevant. It said...
Just pause for a minute. Mr Chairman, I move an extension
Second.
of time.
You second.
That's quick, didn't it?
It'll be 2 minutes. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? 2 minutes.
Thank you, colleagues. The Court of Appeal said, if the outcome of the exercise of discretion is irrational, or such that no reasonable body or persons could have arrived at the decision, the only proper inference is that the power itself has been misused. So I will not be voting to misuse my decision-making power today in relation to the proposed accommodation provider target rate. And Mr Chair, I'll say one last thing. In discussion with the Mayor and with others, I did propose, I was very happy to support a 3.58% increase and to set 1% of that aside to fund a TEED's visitor promotion tourist attraction for 1 year and to provide for the opportunity for an economic model to be undertaken to establish the apportionment of benefits of a TEED's work, which would form the basis of the apportionment of cost. And we could take that up through the long-term plan. It has not been supported, but don't think that for some of us who have opposed this today, that we haven't been prepared to bring to the debate some tough options that are an alternate to what has been proposed.
Here.
I accept that some people are going to take a different position from me, but I believe that the test today is not whether we support it. The test has to be if it is defensible, because I believe that we will see the industry soon in the High Court, and I regret that.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. And it is noted your support of 3.5. Councillor Lee, Denise Lee.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's been a very iterative process by anyone's measuring stick, and I've taken stock of the following points. One is that it is right that the cost of marketing be shared, especially the cost of marketing for Auckland, be shared with the industry, which benefits directly, and of whom 90% of their customers are visitors to Auckland. I'd also like to take stock of point 2. I've read and I've heard for myself personally clearly from the industry their commitment to contributing in some way. And that, by my count, would mean an admission that they could and should. But I really would have dearly liked to have seen something tangible that they would have come up with, and it might have avoided some of the intensity of this particular journey to date. But the turning point for me, for my decision to support this proposal, was around classifying the affordability of this and seeing for those across all zones that the band is $1 to $3 for motels and $2 to $6 for hotels. And the other turning point was confirmation of the appropriateness should the industry choose to, or should the operators choose to pass on that cost in a line item that is clear and is visual and can be printed out or visual on the invoice. So if those two practical measures have made very much the difference for me, but most importantly, we're finding ways to lessen the burden on ratepayers. And I see a direct correlation to the, what I'd say was, well, I'd hoped it had been a rational debate on 2%, some of it wasn't, a direct correlation with lessening the burden on ratepayers. And for that reason, I will be supporting this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. For my sins, and they must have been many and varied, I was asked by the Mayor to facilitate a team of people from the industry identified by his office to ensure that the consultation material that went out on this subject was accurate from their perspective. We knew they weren't happy with it, but they did input into the words and information that went out to all Aucklanders. Staff changed that material to ensure that the industry was happy, in inverted commas, with the accuracy. So I went to a number of consultation and have your say events throughout the region, like I think other people did, not just in my own ward, but as far as Matakana and all sorts of places. And many I went with Mr. Duncan, and I can reiterate, he was very clear on what the accommodation targeted rate was all about. My concern on this, however, was the legality. And at the beginning of this debate, I asked 3 questions of both the legal team and the Mayor to ensure that I felt comfortable with, 1, doing this, knowing we could do it, knowing it could be passed on if they wanted to pass it on, and having had that confirmation, not just from the Mayor, but from our legal team and others, I feel confident about the legality. Currently, ratepayers pay for this part of the levy and actually get almost Zippo benefit. So we've listened to what they've said, and in my ward it's 72%. We've listened to what the industry said, and staff have come up with a 50-50, a fair balance between what the industry should pay and what the ratepayers should pay. The fact that it's a targeted rate on the accommodation sector and not other parts of the industry, I think when I looked at that, I could see that, quite frankly, when I go to a restaurant and pay, say, $25 for a main course, it's that same fee today, tomorrow, and if I go back to the same restaurant next month. But the accommodation industry has the ability to vary their rate on a daily basis. Other parts of the tourism sector don't. The other thing is that there was a remission. I didn't want to put anybody out of business or cause any undue hardship. But the fact that this policy now talks about a remission for those with strata titles and the like gave me comfort from that perspective. And then I had to say, well, actually, why are we doing this in the first place? This will release $100 million that we can then invest in capital transport infrastructure that will benefit the visitor industry and ratepayers over the next 6 years. How much is it going to be? $1 to $3 for motels and $6 for hotels. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a cup of coffee. It's a cup of coffee. $1 to $3 is less than a cup of coffee. $6 is less than a Big Mac. $5.99, I think. Big Mac is.
I think it's 95.
So it's a cup of coffee and a Big Mac tax.
Rounded up.
It's not a lot for the consumer. It can be passed on, and it is the visitor that will pay for it. And then I say, let's look at the government. We've struggled as a council to get the government to agree with some of the things that we want, some people want them to contribute to. This is a tool we have. If we don't use all the tools in the toolbox we have, what message are we giving the government that we are doing everything we can to raise the huge amount of the deficit for the infrastructure for Auckland? And then the last point is, at the moment, ATEED are paying this amount of money in visitor promotion, and the industry actually don't get any say. We're offering them a say at the table as well.
Good point.
So based on all of that, based on the fact that I think most visitors can afford a cup of coffee and a Big Mac, I think it's possible. And I think we should do it. I think we should be brave and stand up and use every tool to try and get all the money we need to do the huge amount of investment we need in infrastructure. Thank you.
Bang on 5 minutes. Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. I'll just say a few brief words, but I actually do want to, because I intended to acknowledge your role in leading that subcommittee, and I know the Mayor and myself may have giving you a little bit of a hospital pass, but
Little bit.
it was not intended, but we're quite aware that
Came out
you've
with multiple surgery.
taken quite a bit of heat on you, and you've burnt a little bit of political capital, and I can tell you around this table that people respect you hugely for that, so thank you, Councillor Simpson. I'll just go on the public consultation and the great feedback, which we say was 3 times greater than previous years. I do take that as being a great step forward. Now, I know Councillor Watson talked about the industry, not getting a lot of feedback on the accommodation levy, but if you go to page 52 of the larger section, I mean, we got very, very good submissions from 114 entities that were hotels or industry organisations. So, and then we've had meetings. We asked them to come to the regional significance sort of users meeting where we had face-to-face discussions with them. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind, and that the Mayor, with his revised proposal, has listened to the industry. Absolutely no question at all that he's listened to the industry. And we've got something that now is roughly sitting 50-50, which is a fairer and more equitable thing as the industry is presented to us. Last thing I just say is, look, rates, incredibly blunt instrument. That's all we have. It's a blunt instrument. It is not perfect. It's very hard to refine it, and we have general rates and we can do targeted rates. We've got some local boards that are using targeted rates, and we've got some local boards, more local boards, that are looking ahead as to whether to use local targeted rates in the LTP. So we have used it for the transport levy. Okay, the interim transport levy is a targeted rate. We've used it. We didn't want to use it, but we had to use it. We had no other instrument. And we could discuss the structure of it, but we're not going to. Today we're going to talk about a growth infrastructure targeted rate as well as this targeted rate. So this is really the only instrument we can use. We would love to have some other instruments. And I suppose we are sending a signal to central government of either party that, look, can you help? We just don't have many places we can turn to. So we're doing our bit, and we're actually realising some of our assets as well. As you know, we're realising land, we are realising parts of the diversified portfolio, so we are actually showing that we've got skin in the game and we are listening. And of course that'll be part of the discussion in the LTP, whether we have the appetite to do anything further, like selling a building or whatever. So I'm just urging councillors, on the basis that consultation's been very strong, it's been very consistent through most wards, it's been 3-1, and for those of you who think you can just dismiss the consultation has been meaningless, I would suggest that is really a slight to your residents and those that have made the effort. Just because there's only 8,000, put it this way, it's 3 times what it used to be before, but 8,000 people have made the effort to submit to us, and that should be recognised. We cannot be sitting around thinking about those that don't, as though they disagree with us. That's not actually very scientific in itself. So, to conclude the debate, we're going to have Mayor Goff write a reply.
Mr. Chairman, I think I was on the list.
Oh, sorry, well, you're not showing here. I'll have to
You had a conflict. Defer to you.
talk to the staff here. Go ahead, Councillor Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will be brief. When I first learned of this at the end of last year, that there would be a levy on hotel accommodation, I was all for it. I thought this is quite an elegant way of collecting funds. And then, of course, I realised, and we all realised, that actually, no, this is not a levy. This is not like a GST or a value-added tax, which can be passed on depending on how many guests you have. It's a charge, a targeted rate on the capital value of your property. And I recall talking to Councillor Fletcher about this, and we decided, before we came to that realisation of exactly what this was, that this was a good idea.
Yeah, we gave it a thumbs up.
We thought it was a good idea. Then when I realised it was a targeted rate, and I was informed by one of the hotels here in the CBD, just how much extra it was going to cost them, quite frankly, I couldn't believe it. And I went away and I took them, I just could not believe what they were telling me. So I then asked Andrew Duncan to provide a printout of the hotels and motels in my area and exactly what the costs would be. Now, clearly that's changed. But when I went and saw the people who were subjected to this large increase in the rates, the targeted rate, these were small business owners, people who were eking out a living in their motel, employing a few people locally, but struggling to make their business work. And of course, immediately when you told them what was going to happen, the blood drained from their face. They went ashen because they saw all their hard work go down the tubes. And immediately I realised that this is not a particularly elegant, a particularly sophisticated way of collecting money from tourists. It's anti-jobs, and we're seeing people here in a lot of red T-shirts. They will be exactly the people that will be damaged by this. These will be the people who are who'll be the first out the door when the hotels realise exactly how much this is going to cost them. So it's anti-jobs, it's anti-tourism, and we've already heard it's anti-investment in Auckland. The idea of voluntary payment, that's been put up. Well, colleagues, a voluntary payment, can you imagine somebody voluntarily handing over a chunk of their hard-earned cash to a government body to spend on their behalf? It just doesn't make sense. Finally, I've asked this question a lot of times, but the LTP 2012-2015 never stated that the main beneficiaries of the visitor levy or the visitor attraction of ATEED, this $27.8 million, they never said that the main beneficiaries of that were the hotels or accommodation providers. They were, in fact, identified as the people of Auckland, and that is why they were being asked to pay. Finally, Adele was not brought here by ATEED. There seems to be some confusion here, but ATEED did not bring out Adele. ATEED is not responsible for rugby in this city, as has been mislead. I think we're trying to mislead people when we say that Adele and rugby is brought here by ATEED. That's never happened. One other point, World Masters Games, and I think a lot of us enjoyed going to the World Masters Games and seeing old folk run around. But interestingly enough, hotel accommodation in this city was down. I'm done. Was down by 6% during the course of the World Masters Games.
Thank you, Councillor Quacks. Mayor Goff, right of reply.
Well, I will start, thank you, Mr Chairman, by replying to a couple of points that Councillor Quacks has made. The industry claimed the level of people staying in motels, hotels were down for the Masters Games. Maybe that's because hotels put their rates up by approximately, in many cases, $200, $300, $400 a night. Of course, if you do that, that will reduce the number of people who might otherwise choose to stay in those places. Secondly, in regard to rugby games, it might have escaped the councillor's attention, but ATEED is putting several million, a couple of $1 million into those rugby games to ensure that we have 3 games in this city, and that will create tens of thousands of additional bed nights. And of course, the Masters Games did bring
244,000 bed nights to the city. That was of direct benefit to the industry. The industry took advantage of each of those events, and Adele was bought here actually by Regional Facilities Auckland, still paid for by your ratepayers' money. On every, they provided the facility and marketed the event, both things. The first, I want to make 6 points. The first point is this is about a fair sharing of the costs for events that might have a general benefit to Auckland, but have specific and real benefits to the accommodation industry. I know Chris Roberts from the TIA came here and said, listen, what you're spending through ATEED is only $46 on every ratepayer in Auckland. Why don't you leave it there? I reject that argument. Why should the general ratepayers be landed with a bill for which the hotel industry makes hundreds of extra dollars per room, per night, during the events that we organise on their behalf? Why is it always dumped on the ratepayer, and hasn't the ratepayer got the right to share that burden with the direct beneficiaries? And it was interesting that the Herald editorial this morning, not generally regarded as a radical outlet, but said that our first duty as councillors is to our ratepayers, and that these events ought to be financed by the people who are direct beneficiaries. Some councillors here will vote against this despite the fact they believe in a user pays principle. Why is it that user pays applies to ordinary consumers but doesn't apply to multi-million dollar industries that make a fortune out of these events? Some people have said we should have a bed tax. I think a bed tax would be great. It's not within our statutory ability to do that. Is it a visitor levy? No, it's a targeted rate on accommodation. But because the accommodation industry is absolutely able to pass it on, actually the levy will fall on the visitor in the end. I'd also prefer that the government introduced this and then revenue shared with us. But there's nobody around this table with any memory of respective governments dealing in an area like this that believes that a government bed tax would be shared with the local governments that carry a lot of the costs. I'm conscious of those costs. 18 million passenger arrivals a year at Auckland Airport. 18 million. And we're the gateway city. Our motorways to the airport are clogged. The beauty of this proposal is, first of all, it requires the industry to share only 50% of the costs, but the $13 million savings that we make can be converted by lifting our debt to revenue ratio in an affordable way, probably to leverage off that for $100 million extra that will go into transport infrastructure that will directly benefit industry, the tourists and Aucklanders in just the next 6 years alone. Some councillors have said the amount is risible. I'm sorry, $100 million into our infrastructure actually is very relevant. Why have we done it in this way? Well, first of all, accommodation providers are the biggest beneficiaries of visitor spend. If you look at the officials' report and New Zealand statistics, they say that 22 to 28% of the spend by holidaymakers and business in our city goes into accommodation. Mr. Chair, can I seek a...
I move an extension of
move
the hour.
it.
If I may?
Yep, 1 hour.
In favour?
1 hour. Yeah. Secondly, the industry is the one industry that can pass it on. Demand for accommodation is inelastic. The $1 to $3 on motels per room night, or the $3 to $6 a night in hotel room rates, is not going to discourage people who spend thousands of dollars to get here and thousands of dollars on accommodation. And why accommodation providers and not taxi drivers or restaurants? Because 90% plus of the people using accommodation in our city are visitors to our city. The second thing, the third thing if I move to it, the costs to the hotels and motels are not crushing. I think Councillor Simpson spelt that out very graphically and very clearly. Fourthly, the legal opinions. I know we've got a lot of bush lawyers around our table, but I will take the opinion of the QC, of the foremost legal firm in Auckland, and our own in-house advisors, who all reject the arguments that have been raised, sometimes spuriously, about the illegality of this procedure. Our advice is very clear. The second to last thing I want to say is that the ratepayers have been clear in their view on this. 2/3 of those of the 8,000 consulted were in favour. And it's arrogant to say they don't understand the proposal. And it's wrong to say they're not representative, because that 2/3 existed in every ward for every councillor around this table. 1 in 5 opposed it. Mr Chairman, the last point I want to make is, have we done this properly? Have we consulted? Have we listened? Yes. I have had dozens of meetings with the industry, as have officials, and we have listened to any genuine concerns that have been raised. We have built that into the amended proposal that is before you. This is a proposal that provides fairness to our ratepayers and to the industry, in my mind. This is a proposal that is endorsed by Aucklanders. This is a proposal that will also help us meet the infrastructure challenges caused by 18 million passenger arrivals a year in our city at our airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Right, well, the debate is closed, so we will now vote on what is up on the screen, but obviously in your papers. So we're going to do it by division. We will start. So I'm not going to read them out because it's a page and a half, so I'm taking that everyone understands what they're voting on.
Councillor Clow.
Yes.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
No.
Mayor Goff.
Yes.
Member Henare.
Abstain.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you.
Member Kake.
For.
Councillor Denise Lee.
Or.
Councillor Mike Lee.
No.
Councillor Newman.
Against.
Councillor Quacks.
Against.
Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Councillor Simpson.
Or.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
No.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
No.
Councillor Watson.
No.
Right, that's been carried 11-8, and if we could have someone just go and get Councillor Cooper and Councillor Hulse, would be appreciated. Thank you. And we are now moving on to the housing infrastructure targeted rate, which is item
More rate increases.
D.